earlier this morning in introducing my boss, who happens to be the executive director of the Small Business Development Center of Hampton Roads, just so happens to be the largest in our Commonwealth. So he has quite an area, quite a few cities, plus our Eastern Shore, where he is overseeing the development and growth of small business like y'all. A little bit of background on Jim when he has nothing to do, which isn't very much time. He's a professor at the Naval War College of Newport, Rhode Island, and he's a retired naval officer. He also is a vice president, since I'm in the chamber, you must know he's vice president of the Hampton Roads Chamber, which is also one of the largest in our Commonwealth also. And so he's involved with that. And also I found out today that he was one of the directors in tourism in Hampton Roads. So he has his hands a little bit in everything. So he has background with small businesses, obviously, and the growth of the area. He's going to talk about a very relevant subject. I'm glad you're here. And we're coming out of COVID. I'm happy to see that. But there are other issues in our government that are now coming about. And it happens to do with minimum wage increases. There's plus and minuses. And I think Jim is going to be able to explain to you both sides of it, the double-edged sword, what he doesn't know, what he does know, and he'll let you know what he doesn't know. And so I'm not going to make any more than it is. Jim?
Carol. Thank you very much, George, and you're too kind with your comments because I don't know a lot. And this is something that has just come up. Just a very quick rundown, and that is, let's talk about the importance of small business. Every time people hear small business, they go, "Oh, that's just a mom," or something along those lines. Usually, it's a very, very derisive sense. Well, I'm here to tell you, small business is the backbone of the country's economy and the Commonwealth's economy. 90% of all employment is done by small business owners in the Commonwealth of Virginia, right? There's the facts. That comes right from the SBA's Office of Advocacy. So when people sit there and say, "Oh, what are you, just a small business owner?" Well, we're the engine that's driving the economy. Unfortunately, small business owners, because of the pandemic, really took it on the chin. And now, as George said, we're coming out of it, but there are issues that are going to have to be addressed. And the one thing I always talk about with small businesses is that in addition to being the backbone of the economy, you also are the people who go out on a day-to-day basis and take risks, sometimes everything, to provide goods and services to your customers and your clients. And, that's a pretty tough burden to carry, especially during the pandemic, when you not only had to worry about yourself and your family, but you had to worry about your employees and their families, and you had to worry about your customers and their families. That's a heck of a burden to bear. And the small business owners have made it through. It is nice to be able to see the bottom half of almost everybody's face. This is fantastic. I'm not just smiling with my eyes, I'm smiling with my face. This is outstanding. We'll get the next slide, please. Well, here's the paid advertisement. Okay, we are part of a network through the Commonwealth of Virginia under George Mason University. Jody Keenan is my state director. We have 27 offices located throughout the Commonwealth. Half of our funding comes from the U.S. Small Business Administration. The other half I have to raise locally from non-federal sources. Banks, chambers of commerce, municipalities, both Accomack County and Northampton County are funding partners. And because of their funding, I'm able to leverage that to get $2 of federal dollars for every dollar I get locally. And that enables us to have George over here as a counselor. And then the support that the chamber provides as far as in-kind contribution goes a very long way in helping us get the goods and services out to the people who need it the most. That is our small business. One thing right at the top, the views expressed are my views. They're not the official views of the United States government, George Mason University, the Hampton Roads Chamber, the Eastern Shore Chamber, or anybody else. This is all me. So let's get into it. Senate Bill 7 and House Bill 35. These were passed, signed by Governor Northam into law, and they lay out how the minimum wage is going to raise throughout the Commonwealth. 1st of May, which is already coming on, we took a 31% raise in the minimum wage from $7.25 to $9.50. In January, we're going to take another almost 16% rate increase from $9.50 to $11. And then in 2023, another 10% or 9.1%, excuse me, up to $12. Then in 25 and 26, it goes to $13.50 and $15. Now, here's the kicker. The 25 and 26 are not cast in concrete. They are going to have to be authorized by the General Assembly in the 2024. So if it looks like things are going to be bad, the electorate, small businesses, the chambers, and everybody else can come together and convince their elected officials that, we can't handle going any higher. We've already, and you will have data to show either yes or no. So if it looks like it's going to bear an undue burden on small businesses and the business community at large, then let's go ahead and get together and talk to our elected officials to let them know. The Department of Labor and Industry has some cutouts, if you will, where people do not have to pay minimum wage. And they're spelled out on the screen here. Caddies, if you're under 18 and employed by your parents, if you're under 16 and employed by anybody. Summer camp counselors, students, work study, babysitters, things along those lines. And farm workers and laborers, obviously a big issue over here on the Eastern Shore. Yes, ma'am.
We can also include where it says summer camp counselors, lifeguards for pools that are in.
That is a nuance I don't know, but I will look that up and let you know. But that's a very good question because they said camp counselors as opposed to lifeguards. So we'll definitely take a look at that for you. It's going to come around onto the federal side. So everybody who's doing contracting up in Wallops Island. I mean, the president signed into law, and unfortunately, there's no changing this when this is cast in concrete. And that's going to have an impact on small business owners who are looking to submit bids to the government. Because all of a sudden now your overheads are going to be going like this. Sometimes contracts are written that you can't go above a certain percentage in overheads. So it's going to be a challenge for small business owners who are government contractors. Just something to be aware of, and you have to factor that into your overall budget because when it comes time to give your BAFO your best and final offer, it could be the thing that knocks you out of the park or makes you bankrupt. So you have to be aware of that as it goes forward. There's the quandaries that we face right now. There are a lot of studies that are out there, and I'm going to put one of them up on the board, both pro and con, as to whether or not the minimum wage should be increased. And there are very, very, very hard-held thoughts on both sides of the aisle. And the reasons that they are giving are totally understandable from my perspective. Okay, and I'm just being the objective guy here. To be frank, when I first heard about the minimum wage increase, and I was tasked to put together this presentation, it was going to be one slide. And that slide was going to say, in quotation marks, "This stinks." And that was going to be the end of it. Well, you do a deeper dive into it, you see there are a lot of other circumstances that have to be addressed. We'll talk about that when we talk about the pros and cons. The old expression, figures lie and liars figure. That's my grandmother, God bless her. That was something she drilled into my head all the time. And people can sit there and work the numbers and say, well, look, here it is. Well, no, they're not right. They're not right. And a lot of it comes down to is the assumptions that you're in. So you have to do a deeper dive and look into the assumptions that are underlying the arguments. Because sometimes those assumptions, could be valid, or they could be, that person's point of view, and they're just saying, okay, it's going to work like this. Preconceived notions. Once again, there are people on both sides of the aisle who say this is too hard or this is not too hard. And then here's the one that I really have a problem with, and that is the market or mandate. Who sets the level for the minimum wage? Is it the marketplace based on availability of employers and employees? If there's a shortage of employees, wages have to go up because you need to attract them to come in. So let the market settle Other sides say, no, it has to be mandated by the federal government or by the state government or some other authority, because they do not have the impetus to be, forthcoming and giving a fair wage for the services that are being provided them. The question comes down to, though, is does one size fit all? Okay, if you're up in Alexandria and you have a dinky little size 4 foot, you can wear that size 4 shoe. But down here on the Eastern Shore, or out in down in Hampton Roads, or out in other places, that's a size 10 foot, and it isn't going to fit in a size 4 shoe, no matter how hard we try. There are different. The cost of living in Alexandria and Washington D.C. is staggering compared to the cost of living over here. Down in Hampton Roads, there are differences between the various cities. If you go out further into the whole country and places like that, different costs of living as well. But now it's mandated one size is going to fit all. And that's going to be a bit of a challenge as we go forward. Then we talk about tips, and near and dear to every restaurant owner's heart. What do you do about that? And the minimum wage right now for a tipped employee is $2.13. Okay, and then they have to make it up by getting tips. And the way it works is if they do not earn enough in tips, the restaurant has to turn around and pay them out of the take, so that it gets them to at least the minimum wage of $7.25. Now going up to $9.50. So that means if you had a very slow day, people weren't coming in, $2.13, they worked for 8 hours, you didn't make any money, you're going to have to take that money and give it to them out of your own pocket. But the beauty of it is that for the restaurant owners, they have the ability to claim it as a tax write-off under the act that's called tip credit. And a lot of times, especially during the pandemics, the small restaurants really use that to help keep themselves afloat, because sometimes that was the only way they could get money coming in. So, the Fair Labor Standards Act, and does tipping go away? And when we were over in France, at the bottom of the bill that they say, service est compris, service is included. And what they did was they added a 20% service charge to the bill. And that way, Europeans don't tip, especially French. Yeah, and waiters just love to get Americans because the Americans don't tip anything. But so the issue is that, especially for small restaurants, do you add a service charge to the meals? Now you're already being burdened with the 2.75% swipe charge for your credit cards. Maybe higher if you take American Express. Okay, now you're going to add another 22% or 20%. You're adding a quarter more to your meal. Will your customers stand for that? How price sensitive are your customers? These are issues that you have to address. We'll get into this a little bit further on, but it is a real challenge for restaurants. You hear Starbucks is saying, we're going to pay $18 an hour for our baristas. Well, we're not Starbucks. Okay, be my guest, pay the $18 because it's guaranteed they'll at least have an employer or employees. But you really need to worry about this because that could spell the difference between life or death for your restaurant. George?
Yeah. A lot of people on their credit card tip.
Mm-hmm.
They won't pay it in cash. One at times, some restaurant owners may spread that tip across the board. Yeah, that's one thing. I just wonder how that's going to be handled. And the other is, let's say your tip is in excess on top of that $2 on the same thing. Above the minimum wage. Because on the business record, a separate bookkeeping or the server gets that extra.
The server, you have to track it, yes, for tax purposes. That all has to be tracked.
Recap his question to the folks. I know that was a lot, but I want to make sure the folks will heard all of that. You gotta go back over that question, restate it, say it if one leaves a tip and it's on the credit cards, if lots of times, as you know, a lot of people leave cash, yes, go to the server. Make sure it's but they put on the credit card, now that's coming in as income. And then he has to take it out of that. That people get up to that minimum. At that time, whatever you're in. What is next? If that's the case, is it income, is it double tax? Now, that taxable income to the server, because it's now in print, it's on the credit card.
I certainly do, George, and there are a lot of things you have to take into consideration. I know some restaurateurs, okay, the server is getting the tip. Let's say you're my waitress and I leave her a tip. Okay, at the end of the shift, the owner says, okay, it's time to tip the back of the house. It's time to tip the bus stand. Share your tips with the cooks, the line cooks, everybody else. And, and bartenders have to do the same thing, and bartenders make tremendous money in tips. But they have to turn around and then take care of their bar backs, things along those lines. So it's a real challenge to figure that out because there's so many different gray areas that have to be addressed. As far as President Biden is concerned, he wants to get rid of this completely and do away with tipping and have everybody just get the wage. But, is that going to happen or not? We don't know. That's legislation that's going to have to be taken into consideration. Okay, so I hope I answered that for you. Okay, let's take a look at, raise the wage act by 2025, $15 an hour. And, it can only be adjusted upwards. So, and the adjustments are going to be based on fluctuations in the pay that the people are earning. So it's a bit of a challenge. But what I find very interesting is the bottom bullet, loss of jobs and wages. Number one, if you're going to be paying this money, you're going to have wage compression because if your entry level is $15 an hour and you have a chef or a line cook, 5 or 6 years experience, I would expect he would want to get more because he's not just coming right off the street, doesn't know anything. The other aspect of it is that they may look at automation in some way, shape, or form to cut down on personnel costs. And there are certain, when I was up at LaGuardia Airport a couple of years ago, I went in and there was, the McDonald's, the Burger King, the this, that. There are 5 of the restaurants right there. And one guy, you walked up to a computer screen, you hit the restaurant, you did whatever you wanted. And then a slip came out with a number on it. And the one guy standing behind the counter, the door would open, a bag would pop out, number 27. Yeah, and that was it. Instead of, when you go to Chick-fil-A or any of the quick service restaurants, you have the cooks, you have the whole back of the house staff, you have the front of the house staff manning the cash registers and things like that. I went into a McDonald's the other day and there were 20 different touch screens. And everything was done by touch. There was no interaction whatsoever with them. Absolutely incredible. But those are jobs. Those are entry-level jobs that give people the opportunity to get in at the baseline and then grow themselves to where they want to go. So that's a bit of a challenge. And what I see is very interesting. When they interviewed wait staff, 69% of the servers said if their pay went to $15 an hour, they lose money because they're getting paid 20, in some cases, $20, $30, $40 an hour based on tips. So, that's going to make some of your servers very hard done by if they get rid of this. Let's talk about the pros and cons. Okay, pros, the current wages do not cover costs. And that's true. And you see stories, and they're heartbreaking stories, and they're very true stories of people who are working 2 and 3 different jobs. They're all minimum wage, and they can't keep enough money, can't earn enough money to keep food on the table. They're taking public transportation, and that just eats into everything. And it just goes on and on and on from there. So it's one of the things is we have to try to make their lives better, which totally understandable. But at what cost? And that's the downside of the house. They say that if they pass this, that 1.27 million Virginians are going to see their wages increase. But I also saw that it's going to lift 30 million people out of poverty at the national level, but at the cost of 9 million jobs. Good for the many, good for the few. How do you get in and figure that out? It's going to improve buying power because people will have more disposable income. It's going to decrease reliance on government assistance because people will be making money that will take them out off Medicaid or take them off SNAP or any of the other things that are out there. And then it creates an incentive for people to stay in school to move forward and improve themselves and better themselves as they go forward. It also leaves the opening for a lot of part-time employees. And that's both good and bad for small business owners. The beauty of it is, as a part-time employee, they get to set their own hours and increases their quality of life and everything else. For the business owner who's hiring nothing but part-time employees, everybody decides on Monday, I can't work. What happens to the business? So there's a lot of balls that are going to have to be juggled by small business owners as this thing goes forward. Now, if you take a look at the arguments against it, when people lay out their budget, they've already laid out their budget for the year, and they did it with assumptions, and they built a financial model, and they know what their costs are going to be, they know what their overheads are going to be, they know how much they can charge, so what their profit margins are going to be. And now we just blew that right up. So everybody's going to have to go back to the drawing board on a clean sheet of paper and start to recompute everything. And that's going to be a challenge because once again, there is an unknown associated with it. There will be an increase in joblessness. Small business owners are going to sit there and say, I can't afford it. And therefore, I'm afraid I'm going to have to let you go, or I'm going to move you down to part-time just so I can stay afloat. The potential for lower employee benefits. If you want to talk about a low-hanging fruit for price cuts or for small business owners, well, maybe you don't need that medical insurance anymore, or you don't need the dental, or you don't need paid time off, or you don't need, and look at all the money in the savings so I can keep my business afloat. And put the burden on the employee to find their own and pay for their own medical, dental, vision, life, all the things that we get offered now as a matter of course just to be hired. And then the wage scale compression, we talked about that. And then once again, for the small business owners, profit margins are going to be squeezed. What is the profit margin for a restaurant? You're almost correct, but good enough to get a gold star. Absolutely. It's about 3 to 5%. 5% if you're really lucky, 3% more than the rule. And the rule of thumb is 30% employee costs, 30% overheads, and 30% food costs. Okay, or it's 33 or something along those lines. It varies up and down a little bit, but 3 to 5% is your profit margin. So for every dollar you're bringing in, you've already spent $97 or 97 cents. And then the rest has to go to whether or not you can stay afloat and pay yourself and things like that. And then cash flow. Once again, if you're having a bad day cash-wise and it comes time to tip out and you have to pay your employee the difference between the $2.13 and the $9.50, where are you getting that money? That has to be money that's given to you. So do you do it contactlessly? In other words, you just transfer it from your card to their card? Or do you have to pay them in cash? I mean, it's just really going to be a tough thing to figure out because we don't know. And then once again, the regional cost of living. It's a lot more expensive in DC than it is down there. And, and one of the studies I saw said, oh yeah, I have no problems putting 22% on the bill. Well, go to Burger King and they put 22% on the bill, are you gonna go to Burger King anymore? Not me, and I order online from them, as you can see. Retail Alliance is the old Retail Merchants Association for Hampton Roads, and they went out and did a survey of their membership. Okay, very small sampling, not statistically, doesn't statistically represent the region, but it gives you a snapshot anyway of what small business owners are thinking about. And you can see 6% would consider automation. Okay. 17% would either reduce staff or cut overheads. 20% would reduce staff hours. 39% said no impact because I'm already paying over the minimum wage. It doesn't bother me in the least. And then 42% would increase prices. But what prices do you increase? Now, if you're a restaurateur, if you're charging $1.50 for a unsweetened iced tea, you now charge $1.60, $1.70, $1.80 instead. You put it on the lower costs things, so it's acceptable, as opposed to the $15 sub. Okay, now if you make it a $20 sub, are people gonna buy that? Probably not. I mean, you have to figure out what the cost of pain is. What's the pain point for your customers? When I first started teaching for the SBDC, we taught a 3-hour class called Owning Your Own Business. And we gave them the materials, we fed them, we had food, we had drinks, gave them all the materials and everything else. And we were charging $15 an hour. And I said, well, we need to make some more money because we're actually losing money. And so I raised the price to $25 and nobody came. I lowered the price to $20, people came back because they will reach into their wallet and pull out a 20 and give it to you. But the minute they have to pull out 2 20s, they're really going to be hesitant. Now we're talking real money, folks, as opposed to just others. So the price increases is going to be a challenge to figure that out. Yes, ma'am.
All right, you have 2 different ones, one for the federal, one for the state. Now, according to when I was a teacher of history, the federal always takes precedent over the state. So what's the story here?
That's for federal. Yes, ma'am. The states set their own wage rates. The governor runs the state. The president has the ability to get into the federal government contracting side of the house. That's where he can mandate that. But for the day-to-day operations, it's the government. Yes, ma'am. Okay, so let's continue on. Next slide. Seattle, Washington is held up by everybody, both pro and con, as the ultimate. This is what really happens when you raise your rates to $15 an hour. Well, Seattle isn't Virginia. And Seattle, when they raised the rates, was in a boom economy. They had Boeing, they had Microsoft, tiny little companies that are just out there. And they had a tremendous cost of living and the economy was charging hard. Okay, what's the economy doing right now down here in the Hampton Roads and on the Eastern Shore? Kind of slow. And on top of that, the governor signed the Department of, call it DOLI, and found out very quickly that DOLI is a 4-letter word, Department of Labor and Industry, and they have new requirements as far as protecting, employees and protecting businesses and protecting customers with regards to enhanced cleaning and personal protective equipment and all of these other things. Well, those regulations were passed as a temporary regulation, but then they were made into permanent regulations. And so once again, now small business owners have additional costs and additional rules and regulations that they have to meet. And so it's going to be a bit of a challenge. So when you sit there and say, well, Seattle did it, and they had no problems. Different times. So you're looking at an apples and oranges comparison. And that's something you just have to take into consideration. Okay, final thoughts on this one, and we'll open it up for questions or discussion. It's not a matter of if, it is a matter of when. Okay, the first pay rate, the first increase in pay has already taken place. The next one comes on the 1st of January, and then it comes again and again and again and again. As I said before, in 2024, the General Assembly has to authorize the 25 and 26 raises, and we'll see what happens there. Yes, sir.
Prevailing wage jobs, do they expect similar increase? And then if so, does the employer contribution remain
Prevailing wage job.
like a state job or anything like that? So for example, if you have an electrician on a government job, they have to pay the employee $30 an hour versus $20 an hour. Is that going to kind of follow, or is that going to be on the federal side and then the state kind of at the mercy of that?
I do not know. I'll be happy to look that one up and see if we can get the answer to it. Sorry. So one of the things as a small business owner, okay, go back and look at your numbers. And I really cannot emphasize that point enough. And then take a look at the current RMAs. RMA is the ratios that you have to worry about, and it tells you, how much your sales are versus your profits, and what your overheads are and everything else. It's a great way to sit down with your accountant and get a really hard look at what your costs are compared to what the costs of everybody else who are similar to you are. And you can see if you are outside the margins or inside the margins. And your accountant has access to that information, and I highly recommend getting with them and talking about this. Sit down and figure out where you can cut costs. Okay, it's not a matter of if, but when. Okay, so you're going to have to sit down and say, okay, if in the cosmic scheme of things, what is it going to take for me to be able to absorb this increase? What overheads have to be cut? And and then revisit it and have communications with your staff. I mean, I cannot emphasize that point enough. There has to be clear and unambiguous conversations taking place so that everybody understands what's going to be expected and what's going to possibly come down the line. Don't just walk in one day and say, hey, we're closed. Not good. So it's interesting. You have to make sure of that. And then last but not least, you have the ace up your sleeve, and that's called the Small Business Development Center. Okay. A couple of things to know about the counseling we do. 3 of them are: number one, it's totally free. It's because of the funding that we get from the localities, from the Small Business Administration, and other supporters. We don't charge for our services. Number 2, it's strictly confidential. So you can walk in and you don't have to worry about hearing it being blasted on WESR at 5 o'clock in the afternoon, or on Shore Daily News or what have you. And then this is the most important one. Number 3, it is totally non-judgmental. So you can come in and the world can be collapsing around your head and shoulders, and George or any of my staff is not going to sit there and go, really? How could you do that? We're not Dr. Phil going, what were you thinking? No, that's not us. Okay? Because your success is our success. My metrics are your metrics. And at the end of the year, we will come back and we'll survey you and say, did we help you? Yes or no? If we did, what was that help like? Did it result in increased sales? Did it result in a loan? Did it result in new jobs or starting your business? You've got a sympathetic ear. George.
There were a couple of questions that the folks here had for you. I encourage you, sir, and analyze again. Please give your callers, because we will get back with you about that. Like you asked.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And then final slide. All right, hrspdc.org. I mean, there's a wealth of information in there, but we also have a couple of others. This is more on the south side with Start Wheel. It is a regional small business entrepreneurship meeting ground, and we're one of the sponsors for that. We have 1004/HRSPDC. That is an online compendium of information that is done by entrepreneurs and small business owners for entrepreneurs and small business owners. There are videos, there are light readings, there are PowerPoint presentations. The neat thing about it is that if you go onto the site without adding the SBDC, you have to pay $30 a month to access that information. If you go in with HR SBDC, it's free of charge. So, please crawl all over it. There's a wealth of information in there that you can take a look at. And then last but not least, we're in the process of upgrading this site, hrsmallbizloans.com. That's the one-stop shop to go to find any information about borrowing money from a bank or a credit union or other financial institutions. So, and on top of that, we have it broken down by areas. We have the Eastern Shore, Middle Peninsula, South Side, and West Country. And we have a list of all the banks or financial institutions that serve those areas and a link right to their small business page. So there's a wealth of information that's out there through the SBDC. And you're going to see another site coming up here in a bit, and that's going to be hrhbb.com. And that's going to be for home-based businesses. So if you operate out of your house, we're going to have a site dedicated exclusively to help answer questions for home-based business. It's a very daunting exercise right now, but we're going to get it up and running. And if you have any other questions, I'll be happy to answer them. If not, I want to thank you very much for coming, and please remember the SBDC is here to help. Okay, well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you all.
Yes, ma'am.
Oh, Mark, well,
There's nothing whatsoever at this point in time, but it's something we're keeping our eye on.